Less than 2 weeks from Election Day, and around 18 million Americans have already cast their ballots in the 2024 presidential election. And as those early voting numbers come in, the political world is parsing through them, trying to figure out what they mean for the outcome of the race. The numbers in several key states show Republicans overperforming compared to 2020, causing some Democrats to fret that the race is slipping away from Kamala Harris. Joining us to discuss the early voting numbers and much more is Niall Stanage, White House columnist here at The Hill. Now, you have a story out on The Hill right now analyzing these early voting numbers. What states are you looking at, and what do the numbers show?
So it's obviously the battleground states that are most important here. It gets a little complicated because not all of the battlegrounds break down ballots cast by party identification. In Georgia, there's a very large first day vote, but it doesn't break down that between Republicans and Democrats, but more than twice the previous record on the first day of early voting in Georgia. North Carolina we're looking at, Pennsylvania, really across those 7 key battlegrounds that are going to determine the outcome of the election.
These numbers have Democrats a little worried, Republicans are doing some gloating, but in your column you urge people to use caution when over-analyzing these numbers. Why?
Because people jump too quickly to a conclusion about the election's overall outcome based on early vote numbers. There are so many things we just don't know about early voting. For example, if you cast an early vote, do we know that you are doing that and you wouldn't have done so on election day, or have you just cast your vote at a different time? Then there's the question of people who are not registered for one party or the other. Many of these battleground states, those unaffiliated ballots, are like 1 in 4 of all the votes cast. So it becomes almost impossible in an election this tight to extrapolate with any confidence.
Seems like there's also some danger in comparing this year to 2020. We were in the middle of the pandemic. Democrats were much more cautious to maybe go outside, go to a live polling location. Former President Trump at that time was being skeptical of that technique. Now he's encouraging it. Talk a little bit about the dangers of comparing 2024 to 2020.
I think the final point you raised there was really important. Back in 2020, then President Trump was much more skeptical, even hostile to early voting, certainly voting by mail in particular, but early voting writ large. He has really changed his tune on that, perhaps a little bit of an acknowledgement that he really harmed himself and harmed the Republican Party by that opposition to early voting. So, for example, he did a rally in Georgia on the first day of early voting and encouraged his supporters to get to the polls, cast those ballots as quickly as they could.
Let's talk about Nevada. John Ralston is a famed political reporter there that everybody listens to every 4 years during a presidential election. He says the numbers he's seeing could signal serious danger for Democrats and for Kamala Harris in that state, seeing big turnout in rural counties. Do you place any weight on what he's seeing so far, or is it still too early to make a judgment there?
I do think he has a valid point, notwithstanding what I just said about extrapolating too early, because in Nevada, Democrats really do need a big turnout in Las Vegas and Reno, the two biggest cities, and we're not really seeing the kind of lead that we would normally expect Democrats to rack up there. That obviously means 2 things. One is rural counties, which tend to be more Republican, can have greater sway, and also Democrats aren't building that sort of buffer that they typically need if they are to survive an election day vote that typically skews more Republican.
That's interesting because Nevada was seen as one of the best swing states for the Harris campaign. Let's talk a little bit about Georgia. According to a Decision Desk HQ analysis, 30% of expected voters have already cast ballots in that state. And in that analysis, it says that white voters are making up a higher percentage of those vote totals than in years past. Again, notwithstanding what you've said, is that worrisome for Democrats?
I think it is. I think you would be happier if you were a Republican with those kind of figures. Now, we have all the caveats and qualifications around it, but if you were seeing high early turnout from white voters in Georgia, that would tend to favor Republicans and favor former President Trump rather than Kamala Harris, who is going, in a state like Georgia, to be very dependent upon the black vote.
Donald Trump is going on the Joe Rogan Podcast. He's going to be taping the show Friday at Rogan's studio in Austin, Texas. Rogan is one of the most popular and also controversial media personalities in the country. In the past, he's been both critical and complimentary of Trump. This comes as both campaigns are kind of scouring the country for persuadable voters. What do you make of Trump going on the Rogan show? And I wonder if you think that Harris is apparently she's been trying to make a play for that. How important would it be for her to also appear on the show, if you think it is?
So I personally think she should go on, and I think that because Joe Rogan's audience in particular skews so much toward younger men, and we know that's a demographic she has some difficulty with. So even if she went on, even if she wasn't perfect, I think the actual going on in itself could do her some good. As regarding the now confirmed Trump appearance there, I think it's partly about demographic appeal, but also, he's done a number of podcasts now, and there is at least this image that podcasts have of being more independent or more politically unorthodox than, say, cable news is. And I think that is probably quite an astute effort on his part to connect with an audience that isn't watching, the cable news networks all day, but is seeking its news and information from different places.
And it's a different kind of interview than you'd get on traditional news programs, where a lot of time the interviewer is trying to confront the candidate and hold them to account. These are kind of chill sessions, and I imagine it's a little bit easier of a thing for a candidate to do.
Yeah, and it's much more conversational, and a candidate gets much more of an opportunity to show his or her personality, which is incidentally one of the reasons why I think it would be better for Harris to do it than to not do it. But yes, Joe Rogan famously does sort of very long interviews, very long shows, and I tend to think that voters in those instances, they don't care if you mess up a line here or there, or if you say something in an inexact way, because they get more of an insight into you as a person simply by listening to you for that length of time.
Former Congresswoman and Democratic presidential candidate Tulsi Gabbard says she's going to become a Republican. She made the announcement last night during a rally in North Carolina with Trump. What do you make of the political transformation of Tulsi Gabbard?
It's been pretty extraordinary, really, from a fairly liberal Democrat to now a Republican, and it has been quite a meandering route, through all those years. I don't think, honestly, at this point, anyone was massively surprised by her becoming a Republican. Tulsi Gabbard has very plainly been moving to the right for a long time. Now, it's a sort of unorthodox right position that she adopts, and she can be very skeptical of sort of overseas military adventuring and things like that. But obviously she is supporting Trump in this election. So even in that, through that framework alone, I don't think it's a huge surprise.
Let's head overseas a little bit. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in Israel amid kind of chaos erupting in the Middle East. Hezbollah confirmed today that the presumptive successor to its slain leader has also been killed in an Israeli airstrike. The FBI is launching an investigation into a leak of U.S. intelligence assessments of Israel's plan for a potential attack on Iran. It comes amid escalating tensions between Iran and Iraq after this attack that Iran did earlier in October, launching 180 missiles into Israel. It appears that an attack from Israel on Iran is inevitable. What is Blinken in the Middle East trying to do, and what do you think are the prospects for further escalation in the Middle East after this attack that we all expect is coming from Israel?
So he's ostensibly trying to de-escalate the situation and to at least try to persuade Benjamin Netanyahu and other senior figures in the Israeli government to perhaps move toward a ceasefire after the killing of Yahya Sinwar. The problem, I think, is there has been really no evidence that Blinken's pressure or pleadings with the Israeli government has worked very effectively. This, I believe, is his 11th trip to Israel since the October 7th attacks of last year. And a lot of the time there has been this sense that Netanyahu has been sort of, defying US wishes. And I think that's the danger for Blinken, that the more he makes these trips, if they're not effective, then it undercuts America's sort of status as being able to broker peace of any description.
All right. Niall Stanage, White House columnist, The Hill. Thanks so much for coming on.
Good to be here.
Kamala Harris is looking to hold on to blue wall states in this election, but now the party is growing concerned over Arab American support for the vice president in Michigan. Third-party candidate Jill Stein will be on the ballot in that state, and her campaign has received support from the Muslim American group Abandon Harris. And Trump continues to target Arab American voters in the state by attacking Harris's stance on the ongoing wars in the Middle East. News Nation correspondent Robert Sherman is in Michigan now with a closer look at the chances of Arab Americans and third-party voters cracking the blue wall.
Drew, a cornerstone to the Trump campaign strategy is expanding the electorate and pursuing voters that, frankly, Republicans haven't even really bothered to court in many years. This week, the former president has been focusing heavily on Arab American voters, and he made mention of that at his rally in North Carolina last night, in which he believes this is a spot where he can pick up some new votes.
She's in free fall with Arab and Muslim voters. Now in Michigan, did you notice that my poll numbers are very good with the Arab voters? Did you see that? My poll numbers are very good. I appreciate it. You know why? You know why they're? Because I want peace in the Middle East.
And some of the polling metrics we're seeing seem to support that. This one metric gives former President Trump 45% support among Arab Americans surveyed, 43% for Vice President Kamala Harris. Jill Stein back there getting 4% of the vote. I want to bring your attention to this community that we're in right now, Hamtramck, Michigan, which is a community in which the majority of residents here are Muslim. This was the first city in America to elect an all-Muslim-led government. The mayor here is a Democrat, but just endorsed former President Trump because of the situation that's ongoing in the Middle East and the message that the former president has been conveying that he wants that war to end. Remember, during the Democratic primary here, over 100,000 people voted uncommitted in protest of the ongoing war in the Middle East. The former president's team is hoping that these votes here could possibly make the difference in a state that is expected to be tight. Drew?
Thank you, Robert Sherman. The United States has confirmed North Korean troops are in Russia, aiding the country in its war against Ukraine.
There is evidence that there are DPRK troops, in Russia. If they're co-belligerents, their intention is to participate in this war on Russia's behalf. That is a very, very serious issue.
The confirmation from Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin comes 2 weeks after reports from the Ukrainian and South Korean governments saying that more than 12,000 North Koreans were training with Russian troops. NewsNation correspondent Joe Khalil has the latest.
Drew, not only did Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin confirm that this is happening, that we've got North Korean troops now in Russia helping in their fight against Ukraine, but he called it a dangerous escalation. And he said there are going to be consequences in both Europe and in Asia because of this. Now, we don't know exactly how many troops are there, although South Korean intelligence says it's somewhere around 3,000, and we've heard it could go up, that number up to 10,000. We also don't know what exactly they're doing in Russia, whether they're on the front lines or whether they're operating some kind of weapons technology, we don't know. But it is concerning because what it is a sign of, according to officials I've spoken with, is that Putin is desperate and that he would be willing to extend this war even if he doesn't have Russian troops to fulfill the front lines. He could simply import them from some of our other adversaries. I talked to Congressman John Garamendi about this. He's on the Armed Services Committee. He says the bigger concern is that there is a trend, there is a pattern of Russia seeking help from our adversaries and getting it. Take a listen.
It certainly helps Russia. Depends upon how many troops there are and what there are. Probably more important than the troops are the munitions that North Korea has made available. Iran, North Korea, probably China also. So Putin's trying to get help wherever he can. The fact of the matter is we need to continue to support Ukraine.
Garamendi tells me that this should be sort of a kick, an impetus for Congress to get back to the table and work out whether Ukraine needs more aid, more funding, more support for weapons from the United States Congress. But politically, that doesn't seem like it's a realistic path forward, at least not through this year. We have reached out to Speaker of the House Mike Johnson for comment. He has not given us anything just yet. Interestingly, the Republican chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Mike Turner, he sent a letter to the White House a few days ago saying that if this were to happen, this should be a red line for the U.S. and that we should make clear to Russia there will be consequences if they bring in North Korean troops. Now we are here. The White House has not drawn any red lines, but certainly interesting to see how their response will progress over the next days and weeks. Drew?
Thank you, Joe Khalil. That's today's Daily Debrief. I'm Drew Petrimoulx. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Hill's YouTube channel. And come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.